For 63 years, I never once questioned what I put in my mouth. Not once. I bought what my father bought, what my grandfather probably bought, what every man in my neighborhood threw into the cart without even glancing at the label. Bread from the same brand since I was a kid. Frozen dinners stacked in the garage freezer like inventory at a warehouse. Chips in bags the size of pillowcases. And I thought that was just how life worked. Then my wife Helen and I moved to a small village in the Philippines. And everything I thought I knew about food fell apart quietly, without any dramatic announcement. Just slowly, the way fog burns off in the morning. I want to be clear about something right from the start. We didn't move here because of food. That had nothing to do with it. We moved because we were tired. Tired of the pace, tired of the winters in Ohio, tired of feeling like every week was a race we couldn't win no matter how fast we ran. I retired at 62, Helen retired a year before me, and we sat down one evening at the kitchen table and asked ourselves an honest question. What do we actually want the next 20 years to look like? The answer surprised us both. Not a bigger house, not a cruise, not a condo in Florida. We wanted to slow down somewhere that had never heard of rushing. So here we are, a small barangay outside of a mid-sized city. A house that doesn't have a garage, because nobody here needs a garage the size of a small apartment. Our neighbors are farmers and teachers, and a retired nurse named Consuela who brings us queimillas when her tree gets too heavy with fruit. And the food, God, the food, that's what I want to talk about today, because I spent 63 years eating in America and I had absolutely no idea what I was missing. Not because America doesn't have good food, but because I had stopped noticing what I was actually eating a long time ago. The first week we arrived, Helen went to the local market to buy something simple. Eggs. She came back confused. She said, "Ted, the eggs here don't look like eggs back home." And she was right. They were different sizes, different shades. Some had little feathers still stuck to them. Back in Ohio, every egg in every carton was the exact same size, the exact same pale, clean shell, lined up like soldiers. You never thought about where they came from because they didn't look like they came from anywhere. They looked like they were manufactured, which, if you think about it, they basically were. That was the first crack in something I didn't even know needed cracking. A few days later, I went out on my own to find some bread. I found a small bakery maybe 3 minutes from our house, one of those places with no sign out front, just a smell that hits you from the street and pulls you in the way nothing from a plastic bag ever has. An older woman was pulling pan-desal out of a small oven. She handed me a brown paper bag still warm from the heat. I brought it home, and Helen and I sat at the table and ate bread that tasted like bread. And I don't know how else to describe that except to say it tasted like something a person had made instead of something a machine had processed. By the end of that week, that bread was gone completely. Mold on the last 2 pieces, which I threw out, which was the right thing to do. And here's the thing that stopped me cold when I realized it. Back home, our bread never molded like that. We had loaves that sat on the counter for 2 weeks and looked exactly the same on day 14 as they did on day 1. I had grown up thinking that was normal. I had grown up thinking that was what bread was supposed to do. But standing there with that moldy paper bag in my hand in a village in the Philippines, I understood something for the first time in my life. Bread is supposed to go bad. That's what real bread does. And if bread doesn't go bad, you have to start asking yourself what exactly is in it that's keeping it alive when it should already be gone. That question, once it shows up in your mind, doesn't go away. I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. The kind of attention I had never given to food in 6 decades of eating 3 meals a day. And the more I looked, the more things I saw that I couldn't unsee. Helen and I had always done what our friends did back in Columbus. Big grocery run on Saturday. Stock up for the whole week, sometimes 2 weeks when we were busy. We had a full-size refrigerator, a chest freezer in the basement, and a pantry with enough canned goods that we probably could have survived a small disaster. We were proud of that. Being organized. being prepared, having everything on hand. It felt responsible. Here in the village, nobody operates that way, and at first that genuinely stressed me out. Our neighbors don't stockpile, they don't buy in bulk. Helen noticed it before I did. Our neighbor Eddie, who's around my age, goes to the market almost every day, sometimes twice. He buys vegetables for that day's cooking. He buys the fish he's going to cook for dinner that night. His refrigerator, the first time I saw inside it, had almost nothing in it. And I remember thinking, I didn't say this out loud, but I remember thinking, that's not enough food. How does he do it? But then I watched what he actually ate. He and his wife Adoracion cook fresh food every single day. Rice, vegetables, fish or chicken, soup made from real bones. Nothing from a box. Nothing reheated from the night before last week. And I started realizing that the reason our freezer back in Columbus was always packed wasn't organization. It was distance. We were so disconnected from where our food came from that we needed a machine to preserve it for weeks at a time just so it was available at all. Eddie buys his vegetables from a woman who grew them. I'm not being poetic about this. I mean literally that. The woman who sells him his kangkong grew that kangkong. The man who sells fish at the Saturday market caught that fish. Or it came from someone in his family who did. The connection between the person and the food is maybe 2 or 3 steps. Back in Columbus, I couldn't have told you what state my broccoli came from, let alone who touched it, or how long ago it was picked, or what was sprayed on it to keep it looking like that for the entire drive across the country. I started walking more here, which is a whole separate thing, but it connects to this. In Ohio, I drove everywhere. I drove to the pharmacy 4 blocks away. I drove to get coffee. I drove because that's just what you do when you live somewhere that was designed around cars. And when you drive everywhere, convenience becomes the organizing principle of your entire life. You stop at the drive-thru because it's there and you're already in the car. You buy the frozen dinner because you don't want to cook after an hour-long commute. You grab the snack bag because you're eating in the car and you can't exactly make a salad behind the wheel. Here I walk everywhere, and I pass food every time I do. A woman selling boiled corn on the corner. A man with a cart full of fresh lumpia. A small sari-sari store where the kids from the street buy little bags of something sweet. Food is everywhere, but it's immediate, it's physical. It was made by someone nearby, usually that day. And there's something about that, about passing food that smells like food instead of packaging, that changes how you relate to eating. It starts to feel like a normal part of being alive instead of a problem you solve on Saturday morning at a store the size of an airport terminal. I want to say something honest here because I think it matters. I'm not trying to pretend that everything here is nutritionally superior, or that this village is some kind of paradise where everyone eats perfectly. That's not true, and it wouldn't be fair to say it. There's plenty of fried food here. There's white rice at every meal. There are snacks in plastic wrappers and sugary sodas and convenience store chips that would look familiar to anyone who grew up in the States. The Philippines has its own relationship with processed food, and it's growing, especially in the cities. But there's a baseline here, a kind of default, that's different. The default is fresh. The default is made today. The default is bought from someone you can look at. And that default shapes everything around it, even when you're not thinking about it. Back in the States, the default was packaged. The default was preserved. The default was engineered to be convenient and long-lasting and consistent and visually appealing under fluorescent lighting from 30 feet away. And I'm not blaming anyone for that. I'm 63 years old. I understand how people end up eating the way they eat. When you're working 50 hours a week and driving 45 minutes each way, and you have kids and a mortgage and a lawn that needs mowing, and parents who are getting older, and every single thing in your life is demanding something from you. You buy the frozen lasagna because it takes 12 minutes and it's done, and nobody complains, and you can sit down for 5 minutes before the next thing starts. That's not laziness, that's survival. The system was built around exhaustion. But here's what I couldn't see while I was inside that system. The food got worse over time, and I didn't notice it happening. Not overnight, gradually. A little more sodium here, a new additive there, a flavor that wasn't quite natural, but was close enough that your brain accepted it. Portion sizes that kept expanding because the manufacturers figured out that bigger portions made people feel like they were getting value, even if what they were getting more of was mostly corn syrup and industrial oil. I ate my way through 30 years of that slow drift, and I called it dinner. The thing that really got to me, the thing I keep coming back to, was when Helen and I went back to visit our daughter Christine and her husband in Cleveland about 8 months after we moved here. We were there for 2 weeks, and I need to tell you that the food hit me differently. I don't mean that philosophically. I mean it physically. Everything tasted louder, if that makes sense. Saltier than I remembered. Sweeter in a way that didn't feel like sugar, more like something that was pretending to be sugar. Heavier in a way that wasn't satisfying. I ate a sandwich from a place I used to love, genuinely loved, had been eating there for years before we left, and halfway through it I had to put it down because it was too much. Not too big, just too much. Too much of everything that shouldn't be the main event. Helen noticed it too. She picked at her salad and said, "Does this dressing taste different to you?" It didn't taste different. It tasted exactly the same as it always had. We were the ones who were different. Christine thought we were being dramatic. She's in her 30s, 2 kids, works full-time. Her husband works full-time. They do what we used to do. Saturday grocery run. Freezer full. Pantry stocked. She feeds her kids well. She's a thoughtful person. She's not doing anything wrong. She's doing exactly what the system she lives inside asks her to do. But I sat in her kitchen watching her unload groceries from those big reusable bags, and I recognized something in it that I hadn't been able to see from the inside. There were maybe 40 items on the counter. I counted products I could identify by logo before I could identify by ingredient. Boxes and bags and things in pouches that had 11 words on the front telling me what they were supposed to be, and a paragraph on the back telling me what was actually in them. I didn't say anything. That's not my place, and that's not what this is. I'm not here to lecture Christine or anyone else about their groceries. She's doing her best inside the life she has. But I sat there quietly, and I thought about Eddie shopping at the market at 6 in the morning and picking up fish that was pulled from the water the day before. And I thought about how different those two realities were, and how I had lived in one of them for 63 years without once questioning whether it was the only way. That's the part that still gets me. Not the ingredients. Not the additives. Not even the health stuff, though that's real and it matters. The part that stays with me is the questioning. Or rather, the not questioning. The total, absolute, decades-long not questioning of something I did 3 times a day every day of my life. Because when something is normal, you don't see it. You just don't. It has to become abnormal first. You have to step outside it, go somewhere else, eat differently for long enough that your body recalibrates, and then go back, and then you feel it. And once you feel it, you can't pretend you don't. I never questioned why our bread lasted so long. I never questioned why the chicken breasts at the supermarket were so much bigger than the chickens I'd seen as a kid at my grandmother's farm in Indiana. I never questioned why a bag of chips could sit in our cupboard for 8 months and still taste exactly the same. I never questioned why certain snacks were genuinely impossible to stop eating. Why you'd sit there with a bag of something and just keep going even when you weren't hungry anymore. Because something in the design of that snack, the salt-to-fat ratio, the crunch, the slight sweetness at the end, had been engineered, not accidentally, but intentionally and carefully and expensively engineered, to make stopping difficult. I never questioned any of it because everyone around me had stopped questioning it too. My neighbors, my coworkers, my friends from the neighborhood, my family. We were all inside the same thing together. And inside is inside. You can't see the walls when you're standing against them. Living here changed the rhythm of my day in ways I didn't expect. I wake up earlier now, which is partly the roosters and partly just the light, which comes in differently than Ohio light does. Most mornings I walk to a small stall near the main road where a woman named Felicidad, everyone calls her Feely, sells hot lugaw and coffee. I sit on a plastic stool and eat my breakfast outside, watching the morning organize itself around me. I know what's in my food because I can see it being made. It's rice, it's ginger, it's an egg, it's a little bit of something green. The ingredient list is about 5 items long, and all 5 of them are things that grow. Then I walk home past the small vegetable stands that appear every morning and disappear by noon. Helen usually meets me on the way back, and we pick up whatever looks good for dinner. We don't plan the week's meals. We just see what's there. Yesterday it was eggplant and bitter melon and some small, sweet tomatoes. The day before it was a kind of leafy green I still can't name properly but have learned to love with a little garlic and fish sauce. We cook it ourselves, which is something I hadn't done regularly in maybe 15 years before we moved here. Back in Columbus, I cooked on weekends sometimes when I felt like it. Grilling, mostly. Big steaks, burgers, the kind of cooking that's more performance than nourishment. During the week, Helen cooked, or we ordered in, or we picked something up on the way home. We had good intentions about cooking more, but good intentions don't survive long against 45-minute commutes and soccer practices and all the other things that fill a life up so completely that food becomes something you just solve. Here, cooking is part of the day the way breathing is part of the day. Not because I've become some kind of health monk. I want to be very clear about that, but because the food is right there, and it's fresh and it's not expensive, and we have time. Those 4 things together, proximity, freshness, affordability, and time, change everything. They change what you eat and how you eat it, and what you notice about eating, and eventually what you expect from food. I think about my own father sometimes when I walk through the market here. He was a practical man, a machinist from Akron, not someone who spent a lot of time thinking about food philosophy. But I remember that he used to say, when I was very young, before the big grocery chains came to our town and changed how everyone shopped, he used to say that you could tell good bread because it felt heavy. He meant it literally, the weight of real ingredients. And then somewhere along the way, bread got light, and the lightness got normalized. And we forgot what heavy used to mean. I'm not saying I've figured everything out. I'm 63, not a nutritionist, not a doctor, not anyone who has any authority to tell anyone else what to eat. And I'm definitely not saying that moving to a village in the Philippines is the solution to anything. That's obviously not practical for most people, and I understand that completely. But what I am saying is that leaving gave me something I didn't expect. Distance. And distance gave me eyes I didn't know I was missing. There's a word in Filipino, hindi ko alam, which means I don't know, but people here use it lightly, easily, without embarrassment, as if not knowing is just the starting point rather than something to be ashamed of. I've been thinking about that phrase a lot lately in relation to food. Hindi ko alam. I didn't know. For 63 years, I genuinely didn't know what I was eating, or why it was made the way it was made, or what had been added to it, and why and by whom and for what reason. I didn't know because I didn't ask. I didn't ask because nobody around me was asking. And nobody around me was asking because the answer, if you actually looked for it, was a little uncomfortable. The answer is that the American food system is extraordinarily efficient at producing calories. It is also extraordinarily efficient at producing things that feel like food but have been so thoroughly processed, preserved, flavored, colored, textured, and marketed that they exist somewhere in the strange territory between food and product. And the most remarkable trick it ever pulled was convincing an entire country, including me for 6 decades, that this was just how eating worked. It didn't work that way for most of human history. It doesn't work that way for most of the world right now. It works that way in the specific economic and cultural and logistical conditions of modern America, where food has to travel 1,000 miles and last for weeks and be manufactured at a scale that would stagger the imagination of every home cook who ever lived. None of that is evil. None of it is conspiratorial. It's just what happens when a system optimizes for efficiency and profit over time. You end up with bread that doesn't mold. You end up with snacks that you can't stop eating. You end up with a generation of people who have never once thought about where their food came from or what's keeping it alive on the shelf. I was one of those people for 63 years, and the strangest and most humbling part of all of this is not that I found out. It's that it took moving to a village on the other side of the world, eating bread out of a brown paper bag on a Tuesday morning, to make me start asking questions I should have been asking my entire life. The bread goes bad now. I buy it fresh every morning. And I can't tell you how strange it is that something as small as spoiling bread changed something as large as the way I think about everything I've ever eaten. But it did, and I think about my father and his heavy bread, and the way he said it without even meaning to teach me something. And I think that somewhere in that memory was the answer, if I had ever thought to look. When something surrounds you your whole life, you stop seeing it. That's not a character flaw. That's just how human beings work. But sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you end up somewhere new, eating something real, and the thing you stopped seeing suddenly comes back into focus, and you realize that the seeing was always possible. You just had to go somewhere that made it necessary.